Douglas, listen. Every now and then we sit down for these podcasts and we have a list of topics to discuss. Every now and then we have nothing. Sometimes the lists of topic shows are great. Sometimes the ones where we have nothing are also great. In general,
Basically, everything we do is great.
Really, it is. It is. But this week's show is like extra special great because on one side I'm completely unprepared, and on the other side I've got an incredible topic that we're going to be discussing, and I didn't even come up with the idea. Usually I think the topic ideas that are great are my ideas, right? But it's not even my idea.
It's true. It's true. Sorry, I was just laughing about the humility you have about the topic.
It's very important to be grounded and humble at all times.
I am definitely I am excited for this. We have a guest on the show again. We have a great topic that interests us both, just like to our core. So instead of just meandering about, let's just dive into it. You want to introduce our guest, Matthias?
Absolutely. And first off, right, to be even more humble, I think this is our longest run of guests in a row that we've had, right?
It is.
And the diversity of guests makes us even more awesome, right?
Exactly. The people we bring in show just how great we are. They're all incredible people, but just think of how incredible a person has to be to know these people, right?
Absolutely.
And to know somebody that's involved with the fastest known time website, like how cool are we?
Oh my gosh. Perhaps we need to pause and make sure that Alex is still on the other line. He might have already dropped off, rolling his eyes, be like, I never signed up for this. Alex Bond from the fastest known time website and larger Equiverse is with us today. Welcome, Alex. This is super exciting.
Hello, I'm glad to be here talking with you all.
So before we dive into fastest known times, why don't you, because you're obviously more than just a fastest known time guy, quickly give us a rundown of who you are, where you live, what you do, so people have an idea who Alex Bond is.
Well, I live here in Seattle, Washington. I was one of the rare people these days who was actually born here, and I got into trail running about 5 or 6 years ago. I got my start really as just a hiker, and I was hiking around and I would see these people running, and they had very small packs and I had a very big pack, and mine was heavy, and I was wearing boots, and they looked like they were having a lot more fun than I did. And so I sort of tried to figure out, what are these people doing? How do I do that? And so, I got on Google and I talked to some folks, and pretty quickly I got interested in trail running, started doing some races. And, one of the things that I've always been really interested in is, and I've done, probably 8 to 10 races, 50K races maybe. But, what I've always found more interesting, since I come from that hiking background, is the idea of not just training to do some race or, the 10K or the half marathon or the marathon or whatever, but, trying to go out into the wilderness and do a hike like I used to do, but come at it with that quicker attitude of, I'm going to wear shoes instead of boots. I'm going to wear my little, running vest instead of a big backpack. I'm going to bring the things that I need and maybe not some of the things that I don't, and, focus on sort of trying to do those hikes that in the guidebook might be 2 days or 3 days, and see if I can do them in 1 day. And that's something that I've had, there's obviously here in Washington State and really across much of the U.S., there's almost limitless possibilities to do that sort of thing. And so that's really what's motivated me. And then especially, then you start thinking about things like, well, when I learned how to use an ice axe or I learned how to rock climb, what kind of things can I do then? And it just, more and more possibilities. And, now we see there are people who are getting even more creative, who are incorporating bicycles and pack graphs and, all sorts of skis, all sorts of other human-powered modes of transportation. It's really an exciting time in the adventure running space, and I'm really glad to be a part of it and to be out, running around on these trails here in Washington. So that has been sort of my motivation over the past couple of years, and it was sort of getting to the point about the fastest known time website perhaps, but it was last year that I got involved, and I've never, I think when you think about fastest known time, you think about people going really quickly. And, I got my start as a hiker. I like to walk a lot of the time, especially when we're going uphill. I'm not one of the people who ran high school cross country and throws down 6-minute miles all the time and has that sort of fast runner background. I am, a hiker who's trying to hike really quickly. And so, in that sense, the fastest known time is not necessarily what I do, because might not be the fastest person to have done it. I'm not that super fast runner. But, finding those routes and those adventure runs out in the wilderness where we track we look at what people do, not on a race course, but where they're just out running this trail or running this route. That's really interesting and fascinating to me, and I think to a lot of people. And so, I got involved with the website last year, right as sort of the fastest known time thing really blowing up with the with the pandemic and the cancellation of races. But it's interesting that it really had been growing quite a bit for a couple years before that. And so it's been a fun movement and organization to be a part of. And I think we're seeing a huge reaction from the running community in terms of people getting excited about doing these kinds of routes, especially in a place like the Pacific Northwest, where we've just got an overflowing amount of riches that folks can do.
It is truly fascinating that our sport offers this, because if you're a marathon runner, well, I mean, you're never going to find, a back of the pack marathon runner, right? Like we all are, in a sense. You would never find a race that you could actually get a record on, realistically, right? There will always be, if it's a local marathon, there will always be somebody who comes straight out of college who's going to smoke you. Well, and if it's a competitive race, then you anyway don't have a chance. And so to define sort of your own goals for yourself gets really tricky in most sports. But in this adventure running space, it's so easy, in air quotes, and we talk about what it means to actually come up with something like that. But it's so easy to sort of define your own goals and I don't know if it's not about showing off, but it's sort of creating something that is unique and personal for yourself, beyond chasing the official records on the Wonderland Trail, which, those are by now only available to the very select few, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, the opportunity to make your own choices is really one of the cool things about the adventure running space. Even if your goal is even if you are fast enough to win the Seattle Marathon, for example, the choices that you make on that course are, do I run the 5:55 pace or the 5:50 pace, mm-hmm. And, there's not really a whole lot of decisions to make other than just, can I keep going at this pace? Whereas, there's, on that race course, they've got an aid station that's got the little cups of Gatorade, the route is all laid out there for you and set, whereas when you are out in the wilderness, perhaps by yourself, you're having to make a tremendous amount of choices. Before you even start, you're getting to make choices about, where do you go? What route do you do? It's not the Seattle Marathon chooses it for you. You get to decide what you want to do. And then when you're out there, you're having to make so many more decisions about, do I filter water here or do I keep going? I'm bringing my own food, so what do I eat? Even if you've got a support crew, what kind of things are you asking them to do and where are you meeting your crew? It's just, there's so much more freedom to make those own choices for yourself. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the growth of people actually getting involved, trying to do FKTs and establishing these trails and finding just routes that they enjoy that they want to share, we're helping bring the trail running community into adventure running as well. So it's not just for people who want to race. It's not just for, burning these times as fast as we can on these well-established routes, like you're saying, with real marathon routes. With the new people that are coming out, how has the influx of data that you guys have been dealing with been? Has this been inspiring and fun, or has it been a bit overwhelming for you all?
I think last spring when it really sort of kicked off, the folks running the website were a little overwhelmed, but with how many submissions are coming in and still are really. I mean, we now have, I think, a team of around 12 to 15 folks worldwide helping to manage the submissions, and we're still getting, apparently it's the hottest place right now for FKTs is actually the United Kingdom. They're getting like 4 or 5 submissions a day in the UK apparently, and it's just really going there. But even here in the United States, we had more submissions in April 2021 than we did last year in April 2020. So thinking about the sort of pace of what folks are up to. But I do think that's, you talked about how this can be something that all sorts of folks can do. And I think we both want to recognize that, many people may not be able to set the fastest known time on the rim to rim to rim trail in the Grand Canyon, for example, but that first of all, that you can find your own route in your local area and find something cool to do and put that up on the website and be, if you can't be the fastest, be the first. But that also, the routes on the FKT website are a good way to find ideas for things you might want to do. And,
yes.
It might take me, a couple hours more to do it than the FKT, but that's still a place to go look for beta or look for, information on the route. And so I think it really is a resource that a lot of people can take advantage of and that a lot of folks in the community can participate in, the larger running community can participate in.
So we've been a little bit expecting everybody to know. We're talking about fastestknowntime.com. There will be a link in the show notes. It's a website that has been for a few years now collecting routes all over the world that have some significance. Some of the routes have been significant before the running community approached going out into nature as a sport and chasing times. The Wonderland Trail existed before there was a Wonderland FKT. But this website, as Alex points out, is an incredible resource to find cool routes, and now collects the very fastest time. And you can't just submit Strava like anytime. You only really submit it an effort if you've actually beaten the fastest time on it. So Alex, give us a quick rundown of like what your job is as part of the fastest known time, and then perhaps also give us a little bit of a practical overview of like how does the process work for people who are interested in setting an FKT.
Yeah, and I think I would separate this out into sort of 2 categories: the fastest known, the times themselves, the runs, and then the routes.
Perfect.
And so when somebody does a run, it's on a pre-existing route that's already up on the website, and they basically fill out this form, and it says, what did you do? How fast did you do it? Give us some proof, which could be, your GPX file that has time, that's time coded, or it could be a link to your Strava. That sort of thing. And, we like to have pictures, and then I get an email and I go through and I see, okay, well, they're telling the truth or they're not. And then, unless there's something controversial, it goes up on the website. And so, the expectation, for a lot of, I think the cases where it gets the most interesting are sometimes if it's the first time that a route is being done, sometimes there are situations where I would say the situations where it's the most controversial are, if maybe this is the first time that the route has been listed on the FKT website, but that it has been commonly run. We get this sometimes where, it might be the first time that the route has been listed on the FKT website, but you go look at Strava and there's a Strava segment and there's half a dozen people who have run it faster. And so it's like, okay, I can see that your time is not the fastest known time, even though it's not listed on the website. So we always encourage people to, before they claim an FKT, do a little bit of research and make sure that it is, in fact, the FKT. Check on Strava to see if there's a segment that other people have done it faster before you, but that we also want, it usually is pretty straightforward when folks are doing a run on an existing route. I think the things besides just tracking your time and the proof thereof, are things like, making sure you are doing that run in a safe way. There are some FKTs that are sort of more in the lowlands, some of the sort of rail to trail kind of things that I think are, a little bit more straightforward and, closer to civilization, so to speak. Some of them are also very wild and challenging terrain. There are FKTs on the website that include fifth class climbing that, some people may, I would rope up for, but that, somebody who wants to set the FKT would probably have to free solo, that sort of thing. So really do your homework about what the route is before you attempt it, and make sure that you have an understanding of what you're getting into. Where am I going to get water? Is there an opportunity to resupply? Answering all those kind of questions. And then also understanding the style that you're going to run it in. If you're just doing something that takes a couple hours, you'll probably be unsupported, which means that you're carrying everything with you and not relying on support from anywhere except for filtering water. But that, some longer ones, especially multi-day ones, you might be supported with a crew helping you out along the way that you meet, or self-supported where you set out caches or you, stop at a gas station or stuff like that. These sort of questions of ethics and style can get hairy in some of the really complicated cases, and making sure that people, I think it's more though when somebody is doing something really huge, like, folks are setting out on the PCT soon, and making sure that they understand, questions of style, like, if I want to be self-supported, am I allowed to get in a car and get a ride to and from the trailhead to that grocery store so I can get resupplied? And, folks have said, PCT people have said, no, that counts as support. You're not self-supported if you get in a car. Having an understanding of those kind of questions, and really just sort of having done your homework about what kind of style you want to be in, and what that actually entails when you're out on the trail.
I think you bring up something that I have been generally curious about. There are a lot of routes that are well established that are not on the FKT site. And I will never get that record, but how could one submit that? Could you submit that for someone else, or until the actual FKT holder on Strava or whatever submits it, is it listed at that point? Like, how can one submit a route that maybe they don't have the FKT on, but just get the route up there?
It's okay to do that. I would, I think if you've got any sort of question, first and foremost, I would always encourage folks to, email us at the site, awesome. And that we want to help make everything work. And, there's a contact form on the FKT website. So if you do have any sort of questions, or, hey, is this cool? There have been some cases where I put in FKTs on other people's behalfs, just because, a lot of this was cases like where there is a fast time on Strava that's not on the website. And I kept on getting FKT submissions by people who were slower than the Strava times. And it was like, okay, I'm just going to steal this person's run and put it in on their behalf. I think, even if, we don't necessarily want to do that too often, because, it might be weird for somebody to show up on the FKT website without, them having known that that's happened. So it's not something we really want to do a lot, but, if there is a really interesting route that we want people to be aware of on the website, then, we would like to have it up there, and we would like to have the fastest known time represented on that. So I would say in general that's something that, we'd like to see happen.
Cool. Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I know that there's the contact information on there, but I didn't want to just assume that was where we should direct people to go, was just to contact you guys. But if that's the best way to do it, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think, anytime that we do have questions, the other thing I'll also say is that, I encourage folks to ask their questions up front. It's kind of a bummer if somebody has done their run and they ran really hard and worked really hard, and then it turns out that they made some mistake in style or in verification or whatever during their run, and it's like, geez, if you had sent us an email before your run, you could have saved yourself a lot of effort. You could have gotten it right the first time. And so if folks have questions about creating a new route or making sure that they are reporting in the correct style or with the correct verification, we are always happy to get those emails.
Sweet.
So I've been thinking about this fastest known time organizational structure for quite some time now. I submitted that Cushman 6 routes. I've been thinking a lot about what makes for a good route and how you guys are managing it. And one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing what's nice for you guys is that once a route is established, you are not listing every effort. You're really only listing when somebody beats the fastest known time. So you are not becoming a manual curated Strava that gives a nod to everybody who's ever attempted anything. Otherwise, you need a staff of 500 people. And so I think once a route is established, the effort management is just verifying that it actually was done in the right style, as you say, and that the documentation is correct. But the time is what weeds out a lot of efforts. Where there is more work, from the way I see it, is determining what makes a good route. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think we should talk a little bit about this because, I'm from Germany. We've talked about this on the show before. I think there's so many established named hiking trails, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason why the UK has seen such a big influx in FKTs, is because it's a little bit easier to come up with a good route because everything is so much is named. You can easily you know what trails you should be going on. When over here you've got lots of hiking trails and you've got lots of theoretical routes, but it takes a lot of creativity to stitch something together and make that work in a way that it's a worthwhile route. Let's talk about what makes a route a good route.
Yeah, and that's a really big question as we get more and more submissions coming in. And, what I think what we want to balance is we want to be the FKT website to be a place that is accessible for everyone. And we do want it to be a place where you can come up with a route that's in your area and you do not have to be as fast as Claire Gallagher or Jim Walmsley. You can go out and do this thing and submit that route and submit that FKT. At the same time, this is not Strava segment leaderboards. We don't want to have the local hill outside your house kind of a thing. We do want to focus on the most special and notable and awesome routes that will really inspire people. And so, we have, sometimes people do send in route submissions that are just, here's a nice loop around the park near my house. And it's like, okay, I'm sure that is a lovely run for you to do when you're doing your Thursday 5 miles or whatever, but this is not an FKT that we're putting up on the website. Yeah. And so we've got on the website, we've got a guidelines page that answers some of these questions about what qualifies as a route, and sort of what the expectations are. And again, this is something where if somebody has any questions, feel free to email us or say, and, we might be able to say, hey, if you did it like this, that would be a lot cooler. One of the, obviously folks know their local areas better than we do. I know, Western Washington pretty well, but somebody who is designing a route in Oregon or Idaho or Montana or Alaska, they know their local area better than I do. So I'm going to take their word for it most of the time. But, we do want to see that this is something that is actually really special and cool. One of the sort of ways I like to think about it is like, if somebody was visiting town, and they said, hey, Jim Walmsley is coming to town, and he happened to send an email he said, oh, I found your email address somewhere. I wanted to hear, what's your suggestion for the run that I should go on while I'm in town? What's the thing that you would recommend as the special route for your area? That's the kind of thing that we want as an FKT. The thing that is just your local loop around your local park is maybe not it.
If Jim was to email me, is it all right if I tell him just run slower?
Yeah, but drag a tire behind you, please.
Yeah. One of the other important things when people are writing their route is submitting their route is to write up a good description of it. Write up a description that makes it sound awesome. That really helps too. I always like to get a good route submission. When I get it, I read it and then I don't approve it. I'm like looking to see how long is it for me to drive from Seattle to here? Because like when I get a good route submission, it's something that's cool and exciting, and it makes me want to do it when I read their description of the route. So having photos, having that great description is that describes why the route is notable and special. That's really important for folks to include as well. Put that together, and then also, think about things like we do kind of want to be careful about multi-sport routes. We require that at least 50% of the time on the route is running or hiking. There are a couple routes that we get that are sometimes bike to here, then run this thing, then bike home or bike back to the start or something like that. But we really try to be careful about getting too many multi-sport things up on the website. This is supposed to be a running and hiking website. We're not trying to track your climbing fastest known time, your skiing fastest known time. Those should be cases where it's ancillary to the main activity. And so an example like, the alternative rim to rim route through the Grand Canyon where people have to swim or carry a raft or something like that, like, okay, that's fine because it's a small part of this bigger thing. And generally we do want, and I think it is totally awesome when people do, ride their bike to the trailhead to do the thing. I think that's really cool. And a lot of times it is cooler than doing a fastest known time, but it's not what the website is all about. Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing to keep in mind as we're sort of coming up with those things.
It's probably also a challenge if I'm thinking out loud here, but you probably can sort of decipher too if the starting point for the biking route would be something super iconic and not just your front door, then perhaps it could make sense to make, if the story is there to include the biking. If it's just a means of transportation, then it doesn't really translate. That's how I would probably decide it. Right? I mean, if you would go from the Capitol steps up to Mount Rainier or something, and you would do that multi-sport, then you perhaps could say, well, there's a story that would make sense, as opposed to I'm just starting at my front door.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of people who have done the thing where they start on bikes in Tacoma at the water, yes, bike to Mount Rainier, climb Rainier, and then come back down. And I think that is super awesome. But yeah, I think that they're spending enough time on the bike that it's not what FKT.com is, fastestknowntime.com is trying to track.
Okay.
One of the other things that we encourage people to think about in some cases is, what sort of the ethics of the route that they expect. A lot of times this doesn't really matter if it's just sort of, run this trail from, run down this trail. And it's like, okay, well, that's obvious. You run down the trail. But, where it gets more interesting is when there is like a link up of mountains or something like that. I mean, I would sort of actually turn this around on you, Matthias, and like talk about the Cushman 6, you know, one of the questions somebody might have with that is, do I have to follow in your footsteps exactly, or can I just link up these 6 mountains as quickly as possible, however I want?
Right.
And there are routes that go both ways. There, you know, the PCT, you have to follow the exact trail. It's not just go from Mexico to Canada as quickly as possible. In some other ones, though, it is explicit that just, you know, Nolan's 14, you can do those 14 mountains by whatever route you want. And you don't have to take any specific trail. And we've actually had some interesting controversy around this regarding snow and people on snow cutting switchbacks because, you know, you're on snow, you're not doing any leave no trace issue, but then, okay, now you're cutting switchbacks. Are you doing the route or not? Right. And I think different routes will have a different ethic around that. And so when people are putting together their route, you know, think about what kind of ethic you expect people following you to follow, to go with, and that if you do want it to be an open course kind of thing, you know, make that explicit. If you want it to be a case where people have to follow the route exactly, make that explicit too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was actually wanting to bring up Cushman 6 as an example to hear when I submitted it, if you had worries or concerns or questions. I felt like I did my homework, tried to submit everything in the right way, and I was happy that it got approved, but I wasn't sure if if it met the spirit of the site. I mean, in idea, I want to model it after Nolan, because I think it works for that mountain range, even though it's lower and you have to do probably a lot more bushwhacking. But I wanted to also submit a dedicated route because I think because of the amount of bushwhacking, the line is not clear. And I think it helps people visualize of how they should travel.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that case, you know, there probably is a way that makes the most sense, except maybe on like the Washington and the Eleanor part. I think that might be the most sort of choose your own adventure kind of part of it. Although I haven't done that traverse, so you would know better than I. But yeah, it's just something to think about as somebody is putting together a route. And that, again, you know, we're happy to get an email and have a conversation about, you know, what folks have in mind and to help people make the route that is as exciting and interesting as possible. You know, they have that, folks who are out there have that local expertise, and we have sort of, this is kind of what we see from the website perspective and what we like to have on our website. And that, you know, when we're able to work together, we can make these routes as good as possible.
Yeah. Do you think anybody's going to repeat Cushman 6?
I was thinking about doing the first 3. I don't know about the last half of
it. I can understand that. The last half was pretty exciting. The first 3 is a really, really fun route, the combo. Absolutely.
Yeah. You didn't make the last half sound quite as exciting as the first half, but that actually did look pretty good. You know, I've wanted to do the Washington Eleanor Traverse for a while anyways, and so it's like, okay, well, this Mount Rose thing, it sounds like a good extra to have. So yeah, actually, I am thinking about doing at least that first half sometime this summer.
Nice. Yeah, I mean the Washington to Eleanor Traverse, I thought was absolutely breathtaking. Was hard, was technically super hard. It's not a running route. I had immediately after I posted photos and mentioned I did that, I had several people reach out and saying they've been wanting to do this and they've actually attempted it twice, and they've in the weeks after, and they tried to bribe me to kind of show them the route, and they just couldn't put the pieces together. So it's definitely hard, but it's one of the most funnest, challenging things that I've ever done. So yeah, anybody should try at least that part for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a cool example of the kind of thing I think that is a good route for somebody who maybe is not the fastest person in the universe to submit, where, you know, you brought a level of local expertise. I mean, I don't think that there are any people in the universe who know as much about like the Olympia trail running area as you two do. You know, and so like bring that local expertise about this is a really interesting route. I found some cool ways to link this stuff up. This is, and and put that up. And I think that is like, when it comes to like the average Jane or Joe FKT, like this is the kind of thing that we love to see, is like that local expertise and creativity coming through in the route creation. And I think a lot of folks could do that. They just maybe need to spend, you need to spend some time on CalTopo. You need to spend some time looking at the map and putting things together. And you can, and I think anybody can come up with something really, really cool in their local area.
Doug, are you hearing this, Doug? I hope
Yeah,
I'm going to see a route this summer from you.
There's a lot of routes that I may or may not submit.
Can't wait.
Because I was looking earlier at like what's out here in Montana right now, and I'm like, there's very few routes that are established as FKTs, and that's one of the reasons why I asked the question. Like, there's some that I know that people have absolutely crushed. Like that I'm not going to, but I'd love to see it on there. But then there's others that just people haven't done, and that's one thing that I enjoy about the site, is being able to look at those. You mentioned earlier about the kind of looking at routes or seeing one get submitted, and the first thing you do is see like how far the trailhead is. Are there any trails that you have or routes that have kind of taken over or planted themselves in your brain that you're like, I have to do, or any new favorites that you feel you need to go check out, besides of course Matthias's Cushman 6?
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be up for it this summer, but I have always wanted to do Glacier Peak in a day.
Yeah.
It's 30 miles, 10,000 feet, and big terrain with real glaciers and real crevasses. I've done a decent amount of mountaineering that I feel comfortable on, that kind of complex terrain. But it's scary. I mean, it's big country out there, and if something goes wrong, you're really out there. And so I've always been a bit nervous about actually trying to pull the trigger on it. When are the conditions the best? And, I've seen some trip reports from really fast people who have still taken like 16, 18 hours to do it. And so for me, then I'm looking at, am I going to be like 24 or longer? And so, but the fastest known time on it is absurd. I'd have to look up exactly what it is, but it's really fast. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of that's a bucket list run for me. And I think it's one that a lot of people in the Seattle mountain running community, it's an important run. And it's one that I would be very, very, very proud to do. I don't know if this summer is going to be it for me, because I don't know. I don't want to get too much into it, but I had a rough 2020. And so I've been building my fitness back up to the place where I could do it. I think I'm going to do the Lewitt Trail maybe sometime around the end of June or early July. And if that goes well, then I'll be like, okay, like I am actually really fit. I'd like to do this. But we'll see. There's also a really awesome route in the Olympics. It's, I believe, the Olympic Grand Loop that really came onto the scene last year. It's up around sort of Hurricane Ridge, and it's sort of running a lot of the ridges around there, and it's about 40 miles. And it really came onto the scene when, at least for me, Max King and Keith Laverty did it really quickly. And then a bunch more people. It was kind of like a mini thing with the Wonderland, where like last year the Wonderland Trail kind of blew up and a ton of people did FKTs on it. The Olympic Grand Loop had that in miniature a little bit. That one looks like a really fun one to do, but we'll sort of see. We'll sort of see how things end up shaking out.
Yeah, that one blowing up last year was really fun to see, especially since it was so many people that are well known and friendly in the area. So we got to kind of like watch people we knew compete against each other for that. And it was so fun to see that run go, because it's such that area. If you do get a chance to go up there, I mean, even just going from like Deer Park to Hurricane Ridge and drop down real quick and then drop back up is one of the more scenic routes I feel in the whole Northern Olympic Peninsula.
Yeah, and I really haven't actually done a lot in the Olympics. I lived in Olympia for like a couple years a while back, and I did a little bit of Olympics stuff then, the brothers and Mount Eleanor and stuff like that. But really, I've been more of a Cascades guy, and so it would be fun to go over and do something in the Olympics and sort of get that sense of like, okay, this is really special terrain too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think once people do it, I have been preaching the Olympics for years, and I think once people do go up there, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we've been sleeping on this for a while, which is fine,
Hmm.
because the Cascades are amazing. It's not like you're really missing out. It's just, we are so lucky to have so many options in the West of cool routes. Is how's the East Coast doing with routes? Are you seeing any interesting routes coming through that way?
The East Coast, so I don't, personally see the East Coast submissions come through my inbox because there's separate folks for the East Coast, but they have a lot of focus on a smaller number of routes in general, I think, but they are highly, highly competitive. Where routes like the Pemi Loop and the Presidential Traverse, the FKT might get beaten by 5 minutes, and that's a big deal because
Yeah.
it gets handed around 10 times a summer between this sort of community of folks who are so fast. And so it's sort of a different vibe where in Washington there are 100,000 things to do, and you could run an FKT every weekend and never overlap with anybody else. There's a lot more focus on a smaller number of locations and being highly competitive on them. But it is interesting. You know, we don't necessarily need to get into the whole thing, but that question around cutting switchbacks due to snow on the Presidential Traverse was, it's created a lot of discussion, and I wouldn't necessarily use the word controversy, but just sort of, what is and is not okay in that regard. I think because they are so focused on some of these hyper competitive routes, there's a lot of focus on really important questions of style and ethic and how people do some of these.
Nice.
I want to circle back to what you alluded to during your when you talked about Glacier Peak, and I want to talk about safety, and especially since we're talking about going out there into mountainous terrain, into the backcountry, and at the same time we're not out there to just take pretty pictures. We're out there to with an alternate goal, which pushes us and potentially challenges us. It wouldn't be right for us to have this conversation without talking about the huge tragedy that happened in China earlier this week, where 21 trail runners died at a 100K ultramarathon. In Yellow River Stone Forest 100K. Obviously a huge tragedy, and our condolences to everyone involved. But I think that the important part is that we do need to talk about, as we are heading out there, what is at stake. This is not a little run through town. This is going into terrain that is potentially exposed, potentially dangerous. And that's one thing I did think about when doing Cushman 6. In fact, Chris, who was with me, wanted to go a lot more direct over, take a way more direct line between Washington and Eleanor, and I wasn't comfortable. I wanted to go lower, personally for my own comfort, but also because I felt like that was more true to it being more of a running adventure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important that we speak to the safety concerns around that, especially as people go out there trying to push themselves.
Yeah. I think whether you are attempting an FKT or just going out for a run, we need to be really cognizant of what the risks are. And I think it can be really easy to think of that I've done this 10 times and it's been fine every time, so I'll go out and do it an 11th time and it's sure to be fine that time as well. That's not always a guarantee. And I think, this is something that's really been established, I think, more so in some of the backcountry skiing and mountaineering community, where the risks of things like avalanches are so present and so real. And so there's been a lot of work in those communities to understand, how do humans process risk, and how do we make decisions, and how do we set up systems to deal with our internal biases to make sure that we can make good decisions. Because that's exactly the kind of thing where you ski the slope 10 times and there's no avalanche, so you think, well, on the 11th time it'll be safe as well. Well, maybe it won't. So how do we set up these kind of systems to make sure that we're safe, or that we can be as safe as possible? And I don't think that trail running, especially sort of the mountain running, is nearly as mature as those other sports are when it comes to thinking about risk and setting up those kind of systems to help us make good decisions. And I think that especially as more people go higher into the mountains, many of whom maybe come from more of the road running background, where they're not, the worst thing, getting hit by a car on the road is a big bummer. That's really bad too. But, you don't have the same, if there's bad weather or something, you can, call an Uber or something like that. And that expectation that you can be a really, really long way from help, and weather can change quickly and there can be big problems, is something we really have to be thoughtful and careful about. And it's something that we as a community have to do a lot of education about. And that doesn't just apply to I think that applies to both the quote unquote expert runner just as much as the new runner, because the expert runner is going to be the one who has gone on the run 100 times before and it's been fine every time. And so they assume, I'm an expert, so I don't need to bring this jacket. I'm an expert, so I don't need to bring this, I'll bring the tiny space blanket that will do nothing for me instead of, the bivy bag that weighs 6 ounces more. I think when we think about the backcountry skiing community and how they deal with risk, one of the things that's very well known is that the more avalanche education you have, the more likely you are to die in an avalanche, because the people who have avalanche education are the people who go out and do dangerous things. We as a trail running community need to understand that if you are an expert trail runner, you are not less at risk. You are more at risk because you are more likely to be out doing some bonkers dangerous thing. And that, when we talk about things like education and bringing the appropriate gear, that's not something where it's just, I'm an expert and I'm telling you, the new runner, what to do. It's something we have to internalize for ourselves and remind ourselves about, because we're all going to forget from time to time. I've gone on runs where I didn't bring a jacket or something, and then I was like, dang, I really wish I had this jacket. It happens to everybody from time to time, but you need to make sure that you're setting up those personal systems to keep yourself safe. And, when you are looking at a route, you really need to be thoughtful about things like, if it's a hot route, where am I going to get my water? If it's a exposed route, what's going to happen when and if the weather comes in. If this is too long, are there opportunities where I can bail out early? And, thinking about that sort of thing and making sure you're really doing your homework so that you can do this in a safe way, because I'm actually surprised that we haven't had more problems with people going out on long adventure runs and having something going wrong. It happens here in Washington State to a couple trail runners every year. There was a fellow in the Olympics, I believe last year, who broke his leg out on a run by himself and had to crawl 5 miles or something ridiculous back to cell phone service before he could call 911. That kind of stuff happens to people, and I bet that he really wishes he had an InReach Mini or something like that, and so, this kind of stuff is real and it does happen, and it happens to everybody, whether you're a beginner or an expert. And so I think we all need to remember that.
Yeah, that's incredibly important to remember. It's easy to, as you said, go out on a trail that we know well. And we start saying, oh, well, I don't need to bring this. I don't need to bring this. I haven't used it yet. And then the time you don't bring a first aid kit or you're in reach or whatever, that's going to be when something happens, right? That's just the logic of it all. And I think with the desire to push ourselves and, these known times, there is this cutting corners any way we can, be it cutting switchbacks in the snow or just taking less gear and less whatever. And it's important to remember that, everything can turn at a moment's notice, and it's really easy to break an ankle. And if that happens, how are you going to be prepared? And that still needs to, at the back of everyone's mindset, be there where, if you're out on your own, going to the race in China as an organized race, there's some institutional issues that need to be addressed out there in that horrible tragedy. And I think, it is just a good reminder that this sport, the more we're out there, the higher the increase, the more risk is increased. There we go.
Yeah, and I don't think it needs to be like necessarily a scary thing, like if you do this, you're going to die. It's just, make sure you really do your homework and you're ready for whatever could happen, and that will make it all the more possible for you to have, all this fun. And that, sometimes the way to be safe is to not try to go as fast as possible. I think there are some people, every so often I see people talk about, oh, I want to do, the Wonderland Trail in 24 hours. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, doing it in 3 days is also really fast. That's still a proud achievement. And that's something that is going to be maybe a little bit, not necessarily, it could be safer, it could be less, but it's different. It's worth thinking about. I don't know. I think it's just worth really thinking about how we approach these kind of things.
You used a word that I really liked, and that is, you said personal systems. And I think that's a super great word to kind of wrap this up, in a sense that we often talk about that on our training runs. We go under prepared when it comes to our nutrition. We take the right gear with us in terms of shoes, and sometimes we don't take the right clothing. But if it's just a local training run, then it's not that big of a deal. But we are supposed to be practicing our nutrition, so on race day we are dialed in and we know how body reacts and handles and stuff like that. And I think we need to approach safety in the same way. Like, if you do own a Garmin InReach but don't know how to use it because you never use it, and then in a situation where you might actually have to, you get flustered and you don't know what to do. And so I think it's important that we approach safety in the same way we approach other aspects of dialing our gear in and dialing our nutrition in. This needs to be practiced. This needs to be practiced on a regular basis, that when we do go out, it is part of our system, that we know, okay, I know what I have in my bag and I know how to use it.
Yeah, and that practice can be a lot of fun too. I mean, I know there are more than a few folks who, before they attempt an FKT, they do the route slowly. People who are really going for, they want to do this as quickly as possible, go and do it a couple hours slower, or, however much slower makes sense. And you'll understand the route. You'll preview it. You'll see, here's where the difficult hill is. Here's where I can filter my water. I'll learn all this stuff. And then I'll come back, 2 weeks later, and I'll put in the max effort and really rip the time. So that kind of practice can be a whole lot of fun. It's not like it's not like doing your homework necessarily, but I think that that's really valuable.
For sure. So, to slowly wrap this up, globally, of all the routes that are out there, and I'm asking you, Doug, too, what is a route that is an existing route, and even if you don't put the FKT on it, that you would want to do. For me, and podcast listeners know that for years I talked to me about doing the enchantments. I finally got this monkey off my back. What other routes that we know by name are sort of sitting in our back of our heads where we're like, okay, we gotta do that? And I know you'd mentioned Glacier Peak already, Alex, but I'm thinking taking one step bigger approach. Doug, why don't you go first?
They have to be known, huh? I've been talking about my run from the Livingston train depot up to Livingston Peak and back as one. That's just, I look at it every day, so I might as well do that. That is definitely one that I would really like to do. As far as just grand ones that everybody knows, I think, not going for an FKT, but just to do it, even if I segment it together. Obviously, the Wonderland is up there. Also, the Pacific Northwest Trail through the Olympics, I think, would be a very fun one to do. Mm-hmm. I think that's a section that, I know well enough, but I haven't pieced it together that way. And I think it would just be kind of a blast to go through terrain that I know in a pace that is not multiple days.
Nice. How about you, Alex?
I think another thing I'm thinking about for this summer is, the Pacific Crest Trail from Hearts Pass to Rainy Pass to Cascade Pass. And I think that this is really cool because it really captures the diversity of terrain of the Cascades. The Rainy Pass to Hearts Pass section, where you go past Golden Horn and stuff like that, it's a little bit drier. It's a little bit more high alpine desert. And then the Rainy Pass to Cascade Pass section it's more the lush forests with the glaciers. So it's really, you're getting both kinds of Cascades terrain there in one route. It's, I believe, about 25 miles between Cascade Pass and Rainy Pass, and then I think about 30 miles between Rainy and Hearts Pass. And so it's, and then having Rainy Pass, the trailhead there in the middle, is kind of a nice place to set up for if you're going to have a crew where you can be crewed and get support there, perhaps camp, do them, on day one, run from Hearts to Rainy, 30 miles. That's a big day, but that's certainly doable. And then, camp there at the trailhead at a car that you've got pre-placed. Day two, run Rainy to Cascade and then get out. I've actually heard it suggested that doing Rainy to Cascade to Rainy, that should be considered the Washington State equivalent of the rim to rim to rim.
Ooh.
Because in both cases, it's about 50 miles and 10,000 feet round trip. And that really captures, in the same way that the Grand Canyon is this iconic desert place of, incredible natural beauty, the stretch between, and anybody who's been to Cascade Pass knows exactly how beautiful it is up there. That stretch between Rainy and Cascade Pass is the same thing for the glaciers and forests of the North Cascades. And that, I think I don't want to hype it up too much because we don't necessarily want to have, it's cool that it's kind of our own thing that's a little bit quieter. But I think, that route is just waiting for some, absolute bone crusher of a runner to come in and put in some incredible time on it. And I think if, that's the kind of thing that actually could really get some professional runners' attention. And I'd love to see some folks taking a crack at that. And it sounds like there might be some issues with the Cascade River Road this summer. There's kind of conflicting information about that, but I'm hoping that we'll see. I don't necessarily want to commit to doing something, but that's something that I've got on my list to look at for this summer as well.
Nice.
That sounds awesome. Yeah.
I'm going to throw... Yo, go ahead.
I was also just going to say that, folks should... I would love to see some more awesome routes coming out of some of the states beyond Washington and Oregon. We have big populations here that do a lot, and there are no shortage of routes in Washington and Oregon that we have coming in and being submitted. Montana, Idaho, and Alaska, I would love, obviously have mind-boggling terrain in how cool it is. And I know that there are people doing things like the Bob Marshall Wilderness Classic. And I would love to see some more. I would love to I really want to go to the Bob, and I would love to sort of get a sense of like what is the best route in the Bob if I'm going to go out there, best route or two that I could go there and do, and see some of that happening on the Fastest Known Time website as well. But sorry, Matthias, I cut you off there.
No, that's fantastic, especially since you mentioned Montana, because that inspires Doug to get moving for his summer project. So
I've been looking at the Bob for so long. It's one of those. It's been on my forever list, and I just. It's intimidating. It is so intimidating out there that I'm just like, okay. But no, I agree. There's so much out here. And just looking at the site, you know, the Bridger Ridge Run is a classic out of Bozeman. It's not on the FKT website right now. So, and I think Walmsley has the record on that. So no one's going to pass it anytime soon, right? But there are so many places in every state that are just iconic, and to be able to get this populated with these routes just to not only show what people are doing, but let people know, like, hey, this route's out there. If you're on vacation or traveling through, you know, go check out this 15, 20-mile route that's going to leave you absolutely bewildered at the beauty of the area. So I definitely agree. Hopefully more people will upload. I'll try and do more as well, and see if they'll be approved. So.
Well, and I know like Nate Bender, who is in Montana, and he did, you know, he's a very, very fast fellow in Montana. He has talked about, you know, thinking that it's kind of cool that there, you know, Montana isn't littered with too many, frankly, low quality. I mean, I don't know exactly what words he used, but that it doesn't have lame routes in it. Like every route that's up in Montana is truly high quality, and that he likes that and wants to keep that same kind of standard, which I'm totally on board for. But I know that there is so much that could be done up there. And
yeah. I mean, there's very few lame good trails that would meet the qualifications of like the 5 miles, you know, 300 feet, anything like that. Like once you start looking at any route in any of these Western states, I think you could spend a lifetime in one corner of one state and still not do it all, and see amazing things every day out on the trail.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to throw 3 more routes out, and I know very little about them, but we would love to do every single one of them, and I know about them, not exclusively, but because of the Fastest Known Time website. And that's what's fun too, that you can, you know, if you go on vacation into an area and you try to find a route, even if you don't do the whole thing, you kind of get an idea of what's out there and what's possible. But the 3 routes that I would love to do sometime in my lifetime is, I would love to do the Manitou Incline. I think it's such an iconic, short but insanely steep section that it would be fun to do that one. I would love to run Cactus to Cloud. And then, since we went down, Doug and I, to do Rim to Rim to Rim a few years ago, I was always fascinated with Joshua Tree, and seeing that that there is this Joshua Tree backcountry horseshoe loop that is possible. I would love to do that once. So very different routes than what we've previously talked about. But that's what's so great about the Fastest Known Time website. You find these routes, and you get to know their names, and then you can start searching, and you get the stories behind it, because that's what I think is fascinating. You know, we as local experts, we know our routes and we know the stories, but if you are somewhere where you don't know anything, it's great to kind of do research and find other people that have done things, right? I mean, Doug, if you think about it, we didn't know that much about Rim to Rim to Rim when we did it. That didn't, you know, that doesn't mean it didn't exist. Of course it existed before, and, you know, Walmsley had already done it back then, but to our minds, it wasn't as big as it is now. And so it was cool to kind of research and attempt something that was completely out of our wheelhouse.
For sure.
All right. So, Alex Bond, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to direct people to somewhere obviously fastestknowntime.com, the website. Where else can they follow you? Do you want them to follow you somewhere? Do you have an Instagram, a website, or something?
I have an Instagram, but I don't post very often, so it would be a pretty boring follow. I'm on Strava, I guess, if anybody cares to see, oh, another 5 miles at Cougar Mountain. That's exciting. It's, but for folks who are interested in FKTs, whether that's, attempting an FKT on a route, creating their own route, or just going out and having an adventure on something that, I think the website is a resource. I encourage folks to, review the guidelines before they do anything. And, we are happy to get emails and answer questions and help make sure that folks have a really successful and fun experience. And, summer is ramping up, and I'm really, really, really excited to see what happens. I think one of the big questions we had in the FKT community was, as races resume this year, how much are people going to go back to racing versus staying, doing more FKTs like they were last year? And so far, it seems like FKTs are here to stay, and there is so much excitement around these. And so I'm really excited to see what people do. I'm sure that there are going to be some fast folks doing some really cool stuff. I'm sure that we're going to see some awesome routes come in. And I think it's going to be a really fun summer in the adventure running community until September, when the smoke starts and we have to spend 2 weeks inside
No! Why did you remind us of that?
Welcome to the drought, everybody. Welcome to the drought of the West.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for all the work that you do on the Fastest Known Time website.
And on that, I would be remiss to say the website does have costs associated with it, keeping it up and running. Nobody associated with it gets paid. And so when people submit a route, we do encourage them to make a donation to the site to help keep it live. So that's another thing. It doesn't need to be a big donation, but a couple bucks helps keep the web servers on. And so I want to throw that pitch out there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. This is it.